Hey guys, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. Today we're going to be installing a set of our Blitz Sliders on this Lexus GX460. So the first step is going to be to remove the factory rocker trim and step. In order to do that, we're going to start by removing the two screws in the front wheel well and the one in the rear wheel well. These are going to be either a 10mm socket or a Phillips screwdriver. So next, using a Phillips screwdriver, we're going to remove the two screws behind the doors. There's one behind each door. So with those screws removed, next we'll move to removing this step cover plate. You can either use a flat blade screwdriver or a clip tool, such as I have here. You just got to get underneath and kind of work your way front to back, popping these clips loose. And then you can get that out of your way. Then with the cover plate out of the way, you can come in here and remove your three 10mm bolt heads. All right, so next we're going to get underneath and disconnect the factory wiring harness for the step lights. And with that disconnected, we can remove the 6 bolts holding the step to the vehicle. And with the lower factory step portion out of the way, we can go ahead and open up our doors and remove this lower plastic trim by pulling straight out to release the factory clips. Okay, now at this point, with the plastic step trim removed, we're going to go ahead and separate the two pieces. There's going to be 3 metal clips that need to be removed and then several plastic clips across the center. These metal clips come off pretty easy with the help of a flat blade screwdriver. And go flying across the shop. And then out on each end, there's a tab you're going to have to remove that is attached with double-sided tape. Again, just using a screwdriver or a pry tool. the center will slide right out. Okay, and with the center removed from our plastic trim, we're going to mark it out for the cut we have to make. In the front, you're just going to measure down 3 1/4 inches from this top edge, which also lines up with your body seam. Okay, and then at the rear, you're going to come down 2 inches. I'm using a 2-inch wide tape, so I'm just going to place mine nice and even with the top and cut from the bottom. And you just got to carry that line kind of straight forward where it makes a nice straight visual line when it's reapplied to the vehicle, and meet it with the lower plastic edge down in here. And then on the front here, I'm just going to carry my line from 3 inches. I'm just going to carry it straight back to the back edge of the plastic and make that a nice straight cut. And then we're going to do the same thing in the rear. Now that we have everything taped out front and back, we're going to grab our cutoff wheel and go ahead and make those cuts. If you don't have a cutoff wheel, you can use something like an air saw. We kind of found this works best for a nice clean cut though. And then you can kind of clean these cuts up once you put it back on with like a flap wheel grinding disc or something along the lines there. Okay, now we can discard the bottom section and we can go ahead and snap the top back in place. Okay, and with your plastic trim snapped back in place, you can go ahead and reinstall your front, rear, and your behind the door hardware. Now you're going to take your factory inner step and you're going to need to remove the factory wiring harness from that because we're actually going to use that to wire in our lights later. So you just need to disconnect the electrical connectors from the 2 lights and then remove all the clips from the step itself. With all those clips removed, you can go ahead and remove the wiring harness from the step. So now we're going to begin assembly of our slider before install. Make sure you have the appropriate side. They're both going to be marked with a forward-facing arrow here on the front side. And then you need to install your inner brackets as well. Those both have arrows facing forward on the front side. The larger of the 2 brackets is going to go to the rear of the vehicle. And we're just going to go ahead and line those up and install them with our button head bolts and serrated edge nuts. With all 4 bolts installed, you're going to want to go ahead and push that as far forward as you can to the front of the vehicle. All right, next we're going to be installing the lights into the slider. There's going to be 1 front, 1 rear. So you can go ahead and pull everything out of the box. You want to be sure when you're installing the bolts to utilize these plastic washers that come with them and install that on the bolt before putting it through the hole. And before installing the light, you want to go ahead and remove your blue plastic film. And then you can go ahead and tighten that up with your 3mm Allen socket and your 8mm hex socket on the inside. Then we'll go ahead and do the same thing in the rear. Okay, so at this point with our slider assembled, we can take our factory wiring harness that we removed from the original step and install it into the slider. Just kind of sliding each connector behind the legs here and out the other end. Next, for the purpose of our wiring, we're going to go ahead and pull this sheathing back and clip the factory connector off of the harness. You can go ahead and remove this electrical tape as well, just to give you a little bit more room. And strip those wires. And then the lights that we provide come with a pretty excessive amount of wire. You can go ahead and leave it tied up in there if you don't have the means of cutting and stripping it, or you can do as I'm going to do. I'm going to pull it out and shorten it up and leave just about a 6 to 8 inch leg back here, and I'll clip it off and strip the wire just to make for a little bit neater install. Okay, now that we've got our wires stripped back and cleaned, we're going to go ahead and utilize a butt connector here and connect our two red wires together. And then you'll connect our provided black wire to the factory white wire with a black stripe. And then our connectors are the heat shrink type, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink these down. If you don't have a heat shrink connector, you can use some electrical tape here. Okay, so now we're working here on the driver's side install. Since this GX is equipped with KDSS, we're going to have to remove these two line brackets, and then we'll also have to come up top and remove the parking brake cable bolt. Our bracket, when it goes on, will go ahead and slide right in behind those, and then it'll all be reinstalled. Okay, and then now working on the front portion of the install, we're going to go ahead and remove this KDSS skid to make room for our bracket. And then again here on the front, you may have this plastic cap in your way. You can go ahead and just pop that out of place to make room for our bracket, just so that it sits nice and tight to the frame. Okay, and then lastly, before install, you're going to have to remove these 3 fuel tank skid bolts just to be able to drop that down enough that our bracket can slide between it and the frame. Okay, so at this point in the install, this is where we need to make sure we get our rear bracket behind this KDSS clip, as well as above the fuel tank skid. Just like that. And then this tab here at the center of your fuel tank skid's not going to index into the frame anymore, so we can just go ahead and bend that flat with a pair of pliers. To get it out of the way. And now we can go ahead and start these 3 bolts. Okay, and using all your new hardware provided, we're going to go ahead and reinstall all these brackets. It's going to be 5 bolts on this vertical frame surface, and then again the 3 for the fuel tank skid. And then here toward the center, when you're reattaching the parking brake cable, you're going to have 2 holes. The top hole is going to be your bolt hole, and then the bottom hole indexes for a tab. Okay, and now working on the front of the vehicle, you're going to go ahead and install your 6 bolts, 2 kind of in this bottom cross member, and then 4 in the side of the frame, making sure this bracket's installed behind these KDSS lines. All right, now that all our bolts are started by hand, we can go ahead and tighten those up. Okay, so now that we have the slider up in place and tight at the frame, we can go ahead and attach our wiring here in the center and tighten up our button head bolts that position the slider front to rear. You're going to want to make sure before you tighten those up that you have it centered on the wheel wells. And just as one little note, you can access some of the 3/4 nuts through the jack holes here on the outside. Okay, so on the passenger side toward the rear, you're going to have 1 parking brake cable bracket to remove as well, and then our bracket will slide up behind it. And then you'll have just a couple clips on the frame here to remove to make clearance for that bracket to sit nice and flush as well. Now we're going to go ahead and get the slider up here, and then we'll show you the one other difference from the driver's side. So on the front leg of our passenger side slider, you have the option to drill these 2 lower holes since there's no holes there from the factory. It is going to be highly recommended for hard use applications. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and push this all the way up, tighten our 4 side bolts, and that gives us a place to mark our holes. Okay, so now that we've got this front leg all pushed up and tight, you can go ahead and center punch right in the center of these 2 holes using them as a guide, and then you can drill a 5/16 pilot hole for the supplied 3/8 self-tapping bolts. Okay, so now that you have your 2 holes drilled, you can go ahead and touch up any exposed metal surfaces with some black paint and then install your self-tapping bolts. Just be sure not to over tighten these, just make sure you get them nice and snug. Okay, so on the rear leg of our passenger side slider, there's already a hole here in the factory frame, but it's not threaded, so you're going to have to use one of our self-tapping bolts. Like so. Okay, so at this point, with everything tight to the frame, we can go ahead and tighten everything else up, connect our wiring in the center, and that's it. If you have any questions, email us at info@victory4x4.com or give us a call at 269-459-8447.